Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Starr, and welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. This is a series I've been guided and inspired to do thanks to my energetic connection with Kata Judah. Kata Judah is our beautiful sacred masculine side in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, our sacred feminine side. What I'm here to do is to give a platform to men so they can share their journey into the heart, their highs, their lows, their tools, their practices, insights, wisdom. What did they do to spiral on up that they can now share with other men walking this path? Now, today's guest, I'm very honored to have Chris Bale here. Now, Chris is a master energy worker. He's also a mentor and an intimacy coach. And he writes some great blogs and has an amazing website and does workshops. So I'm really excited to have Chris here and hear all about his journey into the heart. Enjoy. Hello, Chris Bale. What an honor to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Whereabout in the world are you, Chris?
Everywhere at the moment. I'm in between continents every 2 or 3 weeks. So yeah, a lot of different places. I forget where I am the majority of the time.
Exciting stuff. Well, I like to get to know a little bit about the man, but I like to get to know about the man inside. So when you drop all your labels of master energy worker, mentor, and intimacy coach, who's the man that remains inside?
Well, there's not even a man that remains. It's nothing. My work is getting to a place of realizing how spacious I am and everybody else is. That feels accurate. When I go inside, there's not much happening. Most of the time, it's just quiet and it's peaceful.
That's a beautiful place to be. So, can we start discovering how you got to be the man you did today on this journey into the heart? What would you say was your greatest challenge as a child that you had to overcome?
The insane conditioning that we're all raised in. But I'm speaking for myself in this. We're born into a world that has a lot of different forms of dysfunction. So we're programmed and conditioned from a very, very young age. So I would say that was probably it. And on top of that, my sensitivity as a child, which ultimately kind of led me to the work that I do now.
So, thank you. How did you start unraveling that program and conditioning?
Firstly, through feeling all of the misery, pain, illness, and misalignment that it created, all the confusion that it created in my life, attempting to fit into all these other boxes that other people were trying to put me into, that this society tries to put you into. So for me, the process has always been about seeing as deeply as possible. So seeing the fact that, okay, I'm living on someone else's terms. I'm carrying someone else's beliefs right now. They're not mine, because I've never had the space in my young life to even think for myself due to all the conditioning. So my unraveling process was a lot of self-exposing self to self, so that I could really see my motivations for my actions, my behaviors, how as a man, some of them were dysfunctional and manipulative and not safe for women, for other men, for myself. Because when we're raised with conditioning, that is not empowering. When we're pulled away, especially as young men, from our own power and our own sense of purpose and service, we have to get the need met somewhere. And that's often when men go to start manipulating people to try to get their needs met. Because really we want the same as everybody, which is love acceptance, to be seen, to be understood. And when that's not happening, that's generally when we act out and cause harm in the world.
Fascinating, yeah. Chris, what can you say to the men watching to give them some tools and practices to start unraveling their own conditioning and programming and understanding the multi-layers depth of it?
Well, firstly, for him to realize that it's never an overnight experience, right? You're literally unraveling, in certain instances, decades of conditions and pattern behavior. So anything that he can bring into his life that will allow him and grant him the space to get quiet for a moment, to learn to listen to both himself, to life around him, to the reflections that other people share with him. We want to say a lot, right? We're in a culture and a time where everybody wants to share everything and something about something and nothing and everything, including what they eat for breakfast on Instagram. You know, it's the human condition. It's not bad, but it definitely removes the opportunity to be and to listen. Because it's when we stop trying to pump ourselves out into the world and we actually can sit back and start to drop into the receptivity of life. That's when the wisdom comes up, in my experience at least. That's where the intuitiveness comes in. So for men, you know, it's difficult to answer such a broad question in such a small time window. But ultimately, I would like him to focus on awareness, the quality of his awareness, his ability to not only be present, but to stay present. That's the skill set that will really allow him to show up in an empowering way for himself and for anybody that he happens to be around. But without awareness, we just keep repeating the same stuff and nothing changes. So awareness first would be my advice.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Chris. Did you incorporate any physical practices to help you come into this awareness and presence as you were doing, coming along on your journey?
Yes, QiGong. QiGong has been invaluable to me in my process. And that's what I try to teach with both men and women now. I share it as much as I possibly can. But QiGong, anything that will allow you to bring presence and awareness back into the body, into the felt sense. You can do the dishes and have it be a practice of presence, right? You can walk your dog and have it be a practice of presence. We need not get too focused on the specifics of the practice and know it's what quality, what intention are we actually bringing to that which we are doing. So your practice can ultimately be anything. We're not limited. We're completely unlimited here. So presence and awareness is the essence of what we can bring to anything. And from there, it becomes a practice. And from there, it becomes graceful. It becomes divine. It becomes of intelligence.
And with Qigong, because you also being a energy worker and healer, what is it about the energy flow of the body and the practice of Qigong that is so functional to bring this awareness into a person?
Most of our lack of seeing and our lack of awareness is not because there's something wrong with us, because we're set up for that. But usually it comes from the lack of life force and aliveness that a person has access to in their system. So a movement like Qigong exercises, they're specifically designed from the foundation and the understanding of Chinese medicine principles and theoretical study that will actually support the deep fascial structures of the body and the muscles and the tendons, even the organ systems and how the organs are bound to the tissues of the body. It will allow everything to start opening, releasing intention, which means that energy, blood, fluid, whatever needs to be circulating can circulate in the body. So most of the emotional imbalances that we see on the planet, we always want to go to the mind and say that the problem is with the mind. But in my experience, it's actually much more to do with the body and where the person is jammed up, where their shoulders are tight, or where their diaphragm is closed, or where their hips are tucked in. As an example, I've been speaking since, so it's 5 p.m. my time right now. I've been speaking since about 4 a.m. this morning in sessions and events. And I don't know if you noticed, but my voice is almost gone. It's barely left, right? So even with that experience in my body, that if I wasn't aware of it, right, if I couldn't hold the experience of that sensation, that could very easily go to the mind and then filter back down in a poisonous way and actually create an emotional imbalance. It can create neurosis in us. So the benefit of QiGong is it's specifically designed to open the body, to open the patterns of tension that we hold in the bracing, to allow breath back into the system, to allow blood flow, as I said, fluid flow, so that the person's whole being as one unit of energy can actually open and work together. The problem is when we start to separate and split, and you know, people are locked in their head, and then they're disconnected from their heart, and then they're also completely shut out from the connection between the heart and the pelvis and the genitals, the sex. So there can be a lot of dysfunction and feelings of unease that can come up through that misalignment. So for me, QiGong is deeply supportive for that.
Chris, I love that you brought the heart into this and the connection now between the heart and the sex. And let's talk about men. So what can you say to men about the heart energy and the importance, if so, of connecting with it?
So polarly speaking, the internal polarity system of the body, when I work with men and women, it's usually quite opposite because we're set up energetically completely opposite, actually. So the woman is positive in her breasts, her chest, her heart, nipples, and the throat. This whole area for her is outgoing. It's like the plus of a battery, right? It's where her essence comes from. It's where the deep meaning that she has in her life is going to be really deeply connected to her ability to love and nurse and nurture from this part of her body, from this connection that she has to her felt sense here. And she's negative or receptive in the lower part of her body, energetically speaking, where she takes life in, she holds it, she nourishes it, and then she births it back out into the world. So men are the opposite. I generally don't work with men's hearts directly. I will go to his positive pole first to work with that, to reconnect him to that, which is his genitals. So as men, we're outgoing, we're the plus, the positive charge in our genital, our prostate, that whole area of the body. Your dog agrees. It's all good. She or he can bark. There's no problem. That's what I love about animals. They're just they're gonna do what they do, and you can't stop them. So the genitals of a man, you could almost call that his heart when he's embodied in it in a way where he has let go of the pain, the tension, the conditioning, and the perversion that this society has put into him and programmed him with. Men have a lot of shame. I've worked with thousands of men over the last decade, and we carry so much shame and fear in our genital region. One of the ways that you can see that is how we handle it, how a man deals with that part of his body. It can be very rough. It can be very insensitive. And then when he moves into partnership or relationship, it's also dealt with that way because the woman has been programmed to think, well, that's what he likes. That's how he likes to be engaged with this place. So the deepest part of healing for a man to even be able to arrive to his heart in a healthy, integrated, empowered way, right? His receptive pole, where he receives into the heart, he has to actually repair his relationship with his manhood, with his masculinity on the planet. So he's able to walk upright in the world and say who he is and communicate how he loves and understand that he loves different to her, right? But this world is always trying to make everyone the same, but we're not the same. And the reason men are so confused and aggressive and fearful and all these other conflicting things is because we have been so perverted and we've been misguided deeply. So he's been really given no tools to be empowered on the planet. He's only been weakened and he's been consistently torn away from his positive pole, which is the place that he comes into the world with love, with ferocity, with protection, with danger, right? Men being dangerous is beautiful when we're here for service and protection, right? When we can stand for something of higher order. But when you pull him from that part, now he desperately feels undermet, undernourished, and not powerful. And for men, we are about power. So if he's not getting a reflection of power, he will go and try to make it happen through manipulative behaviors, through abusive behaviors. So to come back to the question initially, for a man to be in his heart, I will guide him to his genitals. And when that energy swells up and builds in his genitals, it will flow up through his body and it will open him into his heart. And now he can love safely. Now he's a man that can sit back in his power. He can sit back in his groundedness and be wide open in his heart to receive the love from women, to give love to the women in his life, to his family, to his friends, to nature. That is integration for me. But because of a lot of the confusion present, we have kind of corrupted him. We've mixed him up in himself, where he thinks he's supposed to just go to his heart. Well, that's what's happening. That's what men are trying to do. That's why men are becoming very emotionally reactive and ungrounded and dangerous, not in a good way. He's not trustworthy anymore. He doesn't say what he means and he doesn't mean what he says because he's feeling disempowered inside, because everyone's saying, hey, be more in your heart, be more sensitive. Say, but what about my strength first? All right, because a woman can be deeply empowered in this part of her body. That's when she is in strength. So that's why a woman may project it onto a man, because she feels such strength in her love. She says, well, I guess he works the same, so go to your heart more, because this is how it feels like. No, that's how it feels like to you, but that's not how it feels like to us. And that is the deepest message that I would really love for all men to realize is, come back to your genitals, to your penis, whatever you want to call it. Come back to that part of your body and learn to love it, learn to touch it in a way that's sensitive, that's gentle, in a way where you can really breathe into that, where you can let your expression out, because it will open trauma patterns in him. It will release his tears. It will release his mother wounds. It will release all the things that have kind of been stuffed into him to make him dependent and reliant on everybody but himself, but his own inner law. And a man is very unuseful when he's not aligned with his own inner law, right? That's him living life on his own terms. And that's the deepest part of my work with men, is to try to, or is to support that in coming back to life through healthy guidance.
Oh, Chris, this is so good. And we could go in so many directions. But I think because I did look at your amazing website and I love your blog. So I did get a couple of quotes from your blogs that maybe we can expand into this conversation. So what you were saying about men connecting now in a healthy way to their genitals. I think you had a workshop, or please correct me, on semen retention, and you said it was the energetic realignment for men.
Mm-hmm.
So could you please expand on this topic?
The topic of semen retention, right? This is just one practice for men, but it's the most challenging one for us to really develop ourselves in, because since being teenagers, we have learned to deal with uncomfortability, with challenge, feelings of fear, insecurity, worthlessness, procrastination. I mean, you name it. We've managed all of that through the addiction of ejaculation, through the addiction of going masturbating, possibly quickly, possibly aggressively, locked in the head, watching porn or fantasizing. And when we release for a moment, we think we feel better. And what happens when we release as men, when we ejaculate, is we lose a certain amount of energy. Also, our hormone profile, or testosterone, or estrogen, or prolactin, progesterone, all of that kind of kicks off. There's a cocktail of reactions. And what I discovered when I was working with men is most men who don't practice semen retention, or who have never experienced it, have never actually experienced themselves. Oh, he agrees. I love it.
He's a boy too.
Of course, he hears it. He's championing it. So I'm just trying to reconnect to where I was. Right. So what I discovered was most men who don't practice semen retention have never experienced themselves full internally. When we ejaculate, it generally will take between 5 to 10 days, depending on the man's age and his general level of health and vitality. But it'll take 5 to 10 days for all those hormones, that hormonal cocktail, to kind of stabilize. So most men are in an ejaculation hangover most of their life, because they probably ejaculated today or yesterday or maybe even the day before, but they're still experiencing the effects of it. If a man says, "Oh, I feel fine after I ejaculate," that is a clear sign that he hasn't ever experienced himself full, and he's only used to running on empty. Because I see this all the time working with men. They'll come, they'll say, "Oh, excuse the pun," they'll arrive to a workshop and I'll be talking about this, and they'll comment on the fact that, "Oh, I don't feel any fatigue after I ejaculate." Well, then I ask him, "Well, what happens when you ejaculate? What's the first thing that your body does?" Usually he'll lose his erection. Okay, so vitality is gone, right? Your uprightness is gone. Your alertness is now gone. That's not bad, right? I don't want to create neurosis or shame in men when they ejaculate. That's the last thing I want to create. It's okay and it's very normal to ejaculate, but absolutely not at the frequency that most men are ejaculating, right? Maybe once every 2 weeks is okay for him. Maybe once a month is better for him, but he'll never know until he goes into that practice. The reason it's of immense benefit is when we hold on to our seed and hold on to our life force in this way, it starts to build up and compound upon itself. One of the things that men will share when they start retaining for the first time is, "Oh, Chris, I'm feeling really angry. It's a few days in," or "I'm feeling anxious," or "I'm feeling stressed," or "I'm feeling agitated." It's like, yes, because you're not used to feeling this amount of yourself, and this energy is starting to push up against all the things in you that you haven't wanted to feel previously. And why haven't you felt through them? Well, because you didn't have enough life force to move through them. So the more life force he has access to, the more this life force will start to push up against and expose all the parts of him that are unclear, that are insecure, that are in avoidance, that are lazy, that are not aligned, that are brainwashed. So it can be a very humbling and sobering experience to have to see yourself with a level of clarity and precision that you otherwise weren't used to. And often he wants to just blame the semen retention. And he says, oh, when I ejaculate, I feel better. It's like, no, when you ejaculate, you go back to sleep. Right? That's what happens. And that's also okay. Right? I'm not here to say that everyone has to choose to be here in a certain way. If you want to live sleepy, live sleepy. That's fine. Like, that's okay. You get to choose. But I would love for men to experience the fullness of his own being and the empowerment that comes along with that when he can have a certain level of dominion over his own sexual energy and sexual pleasure. Because the other thing is, when you bring this to sexual intimacy with his partner, he now has to learn how to be in sex in a completely different way for a completely different reason. Because for most men, sex is ejaculation. Otherwise, what's the point? So when we remove ejaculation, now he has to ask himself some deeper questions, such as, now what's the point if I don't get to come? Yeah. And there's so much more there for him than ejaculation. And maybe we'll just allow him to go through the process of figuring that out for himself.
Okay, so fascinating. Thank you, Chris. So are you saying that this is a lifelong practice once a man, starts practicing it?
I'm just, oh, there we go. Sorry, the lights are going down. I'm wanting to turn them on. So is it a lifelong practice? I hope so.
Right.
I hope so, because he's going to require it, and it's going to be of more benefit the more he ages in his life. The older that he gets, the more of value and the more of benefit to his health, his ability to process information, his ability to digest his food, his ability to have endurance in any physical activity he does. So as we get older as men, it becomes more and more necessary for him to hold on to that life essence. Otherwise, he'll start to be plagued with things like lower back problems, knee problems, and a whole other host of age-related issues in his body.
So fascinating. Thank you. Now, another quote I loved from your blogs, Chris, and it's one that we sort of started getting into earlier in our conversation. You said, men, your compassion cannot be trusted if you aren't leading firstly from a place of compassion towards yourself. And I loved this whole blog, how, it was about, we taught externally before internally. Can you please break this down for men in a way that is, that they can start coming to an awareness of the process?
The process of being compassionate with self really ties into everything that I've been speaking of up to this point, right? How better to be compassionate and loving towards yourself than to hold your power, right? Than to hold your semen, than to allow your energy to increase. How better a way to love yourself than actually cultivating more awareness and more presence? The focus never even needs to be on trying to be more compassionate. You won't have a choice when you get present with yourself, because you'll have to see all of the stuff that you've been ignoring. And in that moment, you have two options. You can turn on yourself and bully yourself and blame yourself and create more shame and more guilt about your past decisions and your behaviors. Or you can choose to take full accountability, responsibility for exactly where you're at, for all the mistakes that you've made. Promise to yourself that you're going to do your absolute best to not make those mistakes again for yourself, and that you're going to stay compassionate with yourself in that process. We can be very hard on ourselves because that's what we're taught. And oftentimes we'll be beautiful with other people, but we'll be kind of internally suicidal in our own experience. So the compassion will be equal to the level of awareness and presence that you can generate. And that goes both for men and women, not just for men, but especially for men who have been told to shut their feelings down and be more masculine and all of that, old narrative of being a man.
Well, let's explore men and feelings. Please, as a woman, obviously we're on a different emotional level. What's the healthy balance between men showing their feelings publicly and privately?
Well, I would say it's whatever he wants to do first, right? So as a man who lives on his own terms, I would invite him to decide what feels good for me today, right? Because I'm not going to sit here and tell any man how he needs to be a man. I'm just going to offer some little pointers and maybe some directions that may be of assistance to him, but I'd love for him to experiment with that, right? How much do I share? How much do I want to share? Is it even necessary to share? Because for me as a man, I also have an internal feminine in me. So in that process, there can be a cataclysm and a storm of different feelings and emotions that will rush through my body over the period of an hour or 5. Because I know myself, I can hold and see and feel all of that, but understand that none of it is true. It's just passing by. And there's actually no benefit to me or to anybody in the space for me to bring all of this up. Because if they attach any truth or reality to it, now that's going to create more work for me in the long run. Right? So it's, as a man, you get to pick and choose what's true versus what's just passing through. And the difference to that is if a man is in an incredibly intense traumatic experience, or he has a very core pattern coming up in him that's generally quite present for him, I would always recommend for a man to share his insecurities, his fears, the things that he's having issues and struggling with, whether it's with one of his male friends or a therapist or for a moment with his partner. But this world also functions by the laws of polarity. And if a man only brings his emotionality to his partner, eventually she will not want to be intimate with him. She won't be attracted to him at a certain point. Now, to clarify, that's not me saying men shouldn't be in their feelings or feel or express. Yes, you should, but life is not black and white. And as a man, as an intelligent man, we need to cultivate awareness, and we need to understand that this life is a dance. And we get to bring certain parts of ourselves in certain moments that we see as supportive. And then in other moments, we may go, you know what? It's better that I wait till tomorrow, or that I wait for an hour from now, or let's just see if this passes through. First, let me know it before I go and share it with someone else. Then you have a lot more grounding in the experience. So it's not so black and white. It's going to be a nuanced experience, and every situation will probably require a slightly different way of him showing up and expressing what it is that he wants to express.
This is wonderful, Chris. Okay, so let's get into polarity, please. As you may know, I've interviewed 60 men before you on this, and I often talk about this spectrum of polarity. So I'm interested in your opinions and perspectives. Within a man, is there a natural point on that spectrum? Does it shift in his life? Is more masculinity inherently healthier than less masculinity? What's your perception on this whole polarity spectrum within men?
So when I use the word polarity, I don't mean relational dynamics. So like, I don't really teach maybe what you see in the polarity world right now, which is how men and women should always be relating, or little techniques, or there's a lot of that stuff that doesn't really align with me so much. the polarity that I always would want any man and any woman to come to is going back to the plus and the minus inside of themselves. Whereas for the man, it's the plus in the genitals and it's the receptive or the minus in the heart. And for him to just have an experience through being in these different places of what his masculine energy feels like. What's the temperature of that energy? How does that energy move in his physicality? How does it express itself through him? Because how it expresses through him may not be how it expresses through me or another man or another man. We're all put together a little bit differently or vastly different, but the polarities will be very much aligned in my experience to the physicality of the human. So I just request that he goes to the positive pole and he starts to experience that energy, and then that he also experiences his femininity and any fears that he may have around receiving love or being vulnerable or being sensitive or being seen or learning to be more creative and expressive in himself. And again, each man will have a default balance. Some men may be 50-50, right? In how they utilize the energy and what energies they prefer to be in different moments of their lives. Some men may lean 80-20. So it really depends.
Yeah, I get that. And you have an amazing blog on this too, and it's about healthy polarity. And you said, we live in a time where people are attempting to do polarity. And the later you said, natural polarity requires no mind. So
Yes.
can you please expand on this for the men watching, Chris, and just give them maybe some pointers to actually embody this polarity?
Well, as I've said, his genitals is the place that he should be going to, that he should be spending a lot of time in a present and aware way. So he takes the mind out of it, right? So the embodiment, actually being with his felt sense awareness in that lower part of his body, and also in the entirety of his body, to feel sense of his polarity and how it wants to move in him, how it wants to clear out the traumas and the insecurities and the blockages and the things that are stuck. Because when we land on our natural polarity, there's going to be a surgence of life force. There's going to be a surge of energy that kind of lets you know, yes, you've just landed on you. And this is what we do when you land on you. And what happens is that will come up and it will move through a lot of processing of releasing old stuck energy and blocked areas of the body. So practically anything that supports his embodiment and also anything that supports him leaking as little energy as possible in his life. Because a lot of men are leaking through ejaculation, leaking through tension in the body, just always being tense or being lopsided physically, overthinking, over worrying. You're just burning up fire all of the time rather than actually accumulating and being able to rest back into it in a more receptive way. So that would be my advice, is to bring it back into the body as much as possible.
Yeah, so good. Now, another thing I got from your website is you spoke about the epidemic of bad sex. So what
Yes.
do we do to fix this? Can you please explain firstly what you mean by that? And then, yeah, how do we fix it, Chris?
Well, what I mean by it is that most people are having terrible sex. Because most people are moving around in their life where they're completely disconnected from themselves, right? And they're completely miserable within their own relationship with themselves, but they are 50% of any sex that's ever being had. Yeah. So if they're not good inside, if they're not aligned, if their relationship with themselves is not one of depth and presence and sensuality and intimacy and feeling and allowance and freedom internally, they're not going to have that in the sex that they have. Sex is just a magnifying glass for all of our neurosis and insecurities and tension patterns or behavioral patterns. It all comes up in sex. That's why I lead my work with intimacy, because it's one of the fastest ways to just, have a person see the reality of where they're at and how to work through that. So that was my response to what I meant by it. And I think you asked, how do we fix it? Well, I hope that for anybody listening, my response to part one of the question kind of lets them know my answer. And that is to start to generate a relationship of intimacy with oneself, of embodiment, of feeling. Again, like everything we've been speaking so far up to this point all ties into that. We fix it by actively facing our fear and discomfort of feeling anything, right? We're taught that feeling is weak, that it's too much, that we're not supposed to do it, that it looks cooler or it looks more confident or it looks better or stronger to just be aloof and numb and completely disconnected from ourselves and locked in our heads. And that's the narrative that needs to shift, because as long as that is what's leading us, the sex that we have will also be led by that, which means it's performance. The sex that we have is fake. It's performing. It's friction-based. And the more friction that we use, the more friction that we need in the future to feel anything. Right? So it's all about resensitizing while doing what we also have to do in order to honor the resilience just from being here as a human in a life that's challenging. Yeah, so it's always about the balance and the integration of all of this.
Yeah. How do you define intimacy? As maybe men is like, well, intimacy, sex, what's the difference?
Depth of feeling self, and through depth of feeling self, feeling the other, through you feeling self. So if you're going to put your hand on another person, intimacy is you fully being with all of your felt sense awareness and consciousness in the part of your body that you lay on the other person. So when you lay that part of you on the other person, you now feel the existence of the other person through your consciousness in your hand. It registers something, and then it creates a feedback loop. So then that person feels you feeling them, and then you create an energetic exchange that starts to happen, right? So it's bringing depth of feeling into the contact that we make with ourselves and with other people, but it's slowing down enough to actually feel, because we move fast down here.
So good, Chris. I love this conversation. I'm going to speak for maybe some men watching. I do know from feedback that there are quite a lot of men at the moment who would love to have this intimacy with a woman, but are struggling to connect with the feminine and find a romantic partner, a sexual partner that they can actually, like embark on this journey with. What would you say to those men who are struggling to find, a partner?
Well, it's not advice, more of a question, actually. And is that man putting himself out into the world and initiating his contact with women, right? Is he seeing a woman in the cafe or wherever he is that he's like, wow, that woman is just so beautiful. I'm so drawn to her. I feel her so much. Wow, her femininity moves him so much. Okay, but does he walk over and does he say, hey, I was standing over there and I see you and I feel you and I'm nervous, I'm scared, I don't know what I'm going to say, but all I know is I had to put myself in front of you and let you know how beautiful I think you are, right? Is he showing up in the truth, in the realness of his male energy? Is he showing up in the love of his male energy? Yeah. So for men, a lot of it is putting ourselves out there, because we're the initiatory spark. We're like the light switch in life, right? We create the first reaction to have everything else start to move and come into expression and feeling and experience. So men can be quite crippled in their fear of the feminine. And as long as he's afraid to be completely real and authentic with a woman, he's never really going to feel at ease in himself around women. And it generally comes back to the relationship with his mother. If a man isn't being completely authentic with absolutely every woman that he comes in contact with at all times, because there's no reason for him to never not be real, right? Unless he's trying to hide something, unless he's afraid of being rejected, or afraid that his truth is not honorable or it's not good enough. If any of that is present, it's probably due to his relational dynamic with his mother and how he was dominated by feminine energy, and in many cases dominated by a dysfunctional feminine energy that passed her disdain for men or his father onto him. So he grows up feeling shit, right? Feeling like he's a part of the problem and why his mother is so upset. And then he understands that when he says these things, mom hugs him and loves him and gives him the candy. And when he says these other things, mom gives out to him and removes love from him. So now the man grows up being in relationship with women in the world, and he does the same thing. And I'm saying this from experience, right? I'm not sitting here on some type of pedestal. Everything that I teach, I've been through that dynamic. And for a man, he absolutely has to move through his mother stuff, the relationship dynamic with his mother, in order for him to free himself up and to be his powerful, real, authentic self. And then he can come back and truly be loving with his mother if she's still here, right? He can be a man with his mother, not her child, right?
This is great, Chris. Okay, so a man sitting here and he's like, wow, yes, all light bulbs going off. Where does he start, Chris, with unraveling this unhealthy dynamic or connection with his mother?
So awareness first, right? By seeing all his behaviors and his actions, his motivations, his decisions in his life that were never his to begin with. It's what his mother wanted him to do. Or before he goes and picks something up, he hears his mother's voice inside of him. Maybe she's been dead for 15 years, but her voice is still inside of him going, oh, you shouldn't eat that. That'll make you fat, or, whatever the narrative and the relationship is. So it's through his awareness that he can expose his way of functioning to himself. And he gets to truly see that even as a grown man, maybe he's not the one leading his life. Maybe his mother, or his misalignment with his mother, or what he thinks his mother wants and expects from him, maybe that's leading his life. But the place it will be easiest for him to see is with women, when he relates with women. That's like it's like a cheat code. It's like a quick way to just have a very immediate look to all the places that he has fear and insecurity with the opposite sex, especially when it comes to saying who he is, what he likes, what he wants, just to be met and just to be nourished as a man.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask about rejection, and I was thinking about it when we had the scenario in the cafe where the man walks over to the woman before we got into the son-mother dynamics. And I was going to say to you, what about men who have this fear of rejection because they have actually been rejected by approaching women? Are you saying fixing the mother wound fixes this, or can you give men some other tips to overcome it, in in everyday life if they go out to the cafe today?
Well, it really helps to understand that most of the reactions that he gets in the world are not about him. They're not actually so personal. Now, sometimes they are, right? So I wouldn't want him to shut down to the fact that every reflection that he gets from a woman is not about him. If he's getting the very same reflection all the time or similar, there's something he needs to look at in how he's showing up. But let's say a woman spent 2 hours that morning getting ready. She has a really serious job interview that she's, been wanting for a long time. She's blow dry her hair. She's just put a lot of effort into preparing herself for what she's about to step into. Now, let's say she steps outside, and just before she gets into the cafe, there's a gust of wind that's about 50 miles an hour, and it throws her hair all over the place, and it starts pissing rain, and just life is happening. And she's in a complete experience of overwhelm in that moment. And then there's this guy who's sitting down, overthinking. His whole definition of himself as a man is now resting on this woman's response and reaction to him, but she's just been caught up in the breeze. So it's not fair to put that on her. So there's a lot of stuff that can kind of blow things up for both people when we don't have a wider awareness to the fact that life happens to all of us. And a part of that is sometimes people just aren't available. Sometimes people will say yes when they didn't really want to say yes. Sometimes people will say no, and she'll go home and go, oh my God, why did I say no to that guy? He was, I was so into him. I was just so nervous and I just got uncomfortable. So I just said no, it was easier. We're deeply human. And there's a lot of insecurities that we move through, and it has us make very strange decisions sometimes. So in the land of rejection, firstly, the man has to move through rejection in order to free himself up from what other people think of him. If a man hasn't been burned by rejection to the point where he doesn't feel the burn anymore, and he can just smile and dance with the burn, he's going to be very ineffective in his own life. And it might not feel nice for a man to receive that, but that's just the truth of it. Life will be difficult if he is so cautious in his own ego that he essentially allows another stranger in a split second to define his worth. If I walk up to a woman and I say, hey, I see you and I wanted to come and meet you, I feel like you're, feel like someone I want to connect with, I'm walking over there with something to offer, because I know the depth of work that I've done. I know what I am carrying with me as a man who respects himself, who lives in alignment with his own law. So I'm very aware of what I'm carrying with me as a man. I want men to do their work so they're also aware of the potency that they carry. So then when you do walk over to a woman, I don't go over to try to get something from her. I'm not trying to convince her to like me. I'm walking over with the felt sense of, hey, I can show you some things. And I would love to invite you into what I know. I would love to invite you into my life. Right? So then it becomes, there's nothing about rejection. Because if she says, oh, I'm not interested, I'm like, beautiful. All right. Like, no love lost.
Right.
That's fine. That's fine. And it's a process. It's easy for me to say that now after being rejected hundreds and thousands of times in my life. But the man will learn a lot about himself and how he feels about himself, how he relates with himself by putting himself in front of women and saying, this is what's real for me, and it's all out on my sleeve right now. Take it or leave it, essentially. Do what you want with it. That takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery. And that in itself will say a lot about the man.
Oh, wonderful. Chris, we've got about 15 minutes left because I know you need to rush off a little earlier. I'd like to ask you what needs to be brought into this conversation that from your expansive personal and professional experience, men need to hear or that you can offer into this conversation.
Everything I've just said.
Okay. All right. I do have another question if there is. I
Yeah,
just like to open it up so nothing gets left unsaid, because maybe, I don't ask all the questions that can,
of
reach
course.
full potential. So
Yes.
so if there's shall I go ahead with another question?
Sure. So I actually work better with more specific questions. If something is too broad for me, I don't have anywhere to go in it. So I like having something come up so I can spear it.
Yes,
Uh,
lovely. Well, spare this one, because I know I also, from your website, I got you had a group called The Way of the Woman, evoking the understanding of the wild-hearted feminine. And I love this because my poetry page on Facebook is actually called Wild Heart Poetry. So
Beautiful.
what is the wild heart of the feminine, and what can you in the last 10 minutes, what can you help men understand about the feminine that maybe is being
Mm.
misunderstood by the male collective?
She's not being seen. She's not being seen. That's what I want to communicate. So much of the trauma and the mishandling that's been done onto women is due to the fact that the men that she is with is not able to see her, or just refuses to see her, or doesn't even know that he's supposed to see her because he can't even see himself. So how the hell is he supposed to see anybody else, for that matter? So understanding also for men, just very simply, is she's not a man. So stop treating her like one. Stop speaking to her like she's a man. Stop speaking to her about stuff that she probably, possibly has very little interest in. And if you don't know, you can ask her. At least let her tell you if she's interested in it or not. But when I say stop treating her like a man, what I really mean in that is make contact with her the way a woman requires to be made contact with, so that she can feel the depth of her womanhood when you make love to her. Most men, I would go out on a limb and say that most men, because of pornography, because of how we're indoctrinated into sex, most men have sex with women physically in a way that would say that he dislikes her, right? Where physically he's engaging with her in a hungry, somewhat vacant, disconnected, insensitive way. Not all men, right? I just want to be clear that I'm just speaking to a certain aspect of it. But to understand that it's not so much about what she's saying to you, but can you feel her underneath her words? Because as men, we take everything personal because we can have big egos. And so we'll just listen to the words because this is our receptive pole. This is where we take information in. So this is how men get programmed, especially by women or by their mothers, right? We hear the words and then we attach who we are, or our identity, or our sense of self, to those words. So what I would say to men is listen to her, but listen to her underneath the words. If she's sharing or expressing a huge amount of anger because you brought home the wrong type of butter, it's probably not about the butter. Right? So in that moment, can you hone a sensitivity in everything she says? All of the words, right? It will really require him to shift his entire way of being in front of a woman and how he tunes into her. So he's now listening to her in a very different way, in a way that is actually tuning into the subtleties of her being, of her breath, of the sensations, of the different type of emotions that she might have moving through her being, which, yes, may be informing her spoken word, but she doesn't really require you to talk back at her or to get defensive or to challenge her. Maybe what she requires is for her to speak and for you to just keep walking closer and closer and smile at her and look at her deep in her eyes and open your arms and pull her in and hold her and let her feel your presence, your holding, and then feel her as she starts to relax in your arms. Right? When a man understands himself on a deeper level, he can come to understand her and everything else on a deeper level. From this place, his life becomes inherently simpler and easier in many places because he just shows up in action, right? He can tune into the subtleties. So that would kind of be my main point at men is firstly, understand that she's not your bro. She's a woman, and maybe, just maybe, she's carrying a lot of unprocessed pain and sadness and grief in her body, in her tissues, which then has her get locked in her head. And then she behaves in a way that then you look at her and go, oh, you're crazy. It's like, no, you're crazy maybe because you don't see her, right? Because what she's asking for is to see me so you can step to me and assist me in unfurling and unraveling and letting go of all of this fucking brainwashing and perversion that I've had to take into my being as a woman living in this insane planet. Maybe that's the best way to show up with her. But you have to see her. He has to see her. He has to generate the sensitivity to be able to feel where she's at, so he can then meet her in that place. And again, when you touch her, you can touch her in a way that supports more numbness and more pain and more tension, or you can touch her in a way that supports her in just melting and unraveling and letting go of all of that stuff that she's been holding on to. And the unfortunate thing is many women have never actually really been made love to. They've never really been made contact with. They've never been seen. They've never been connected with. They've only been done. Right? So at a certain point, she even forgets her own essence. And that's what you see right now is women confused and struggling and not knowing why they're so fatigued and feeling like there's something massively out of alignment or something doesn't feel right in their life or something is off. Well, because she's burdened by everything that her system has been holding on to. For men to know a woman is a receptacle, right? She's receptive by nature. This is why sex and intimacy is even more important and vital for a woman. It's more important for a woman's health to be in orgasmicness as frequently as possible so that she can continue to allow the yin and the water cycle through her body in a way that she can wash off the day, where she can wash off all the toxicity that has come in and clung to her. Right? So it's speaking to the differences, and it just requires a little bit of education, a little bit of information and direction, and then he can go and put it into practical terms so he can really get a sense of it. But it's going to be good for everybody.
Thank you, Chris. I must say that brought tears to my eyes. I felt very seen. So thank you from, I'm sure, the women watching as well, and from the men for this depth of understanding. Okay, I know we only have 5 minutes left. So I'd like to ask you, what's your highest value as a man?
That attention, presence,
Right.
seeing one another. Yeah. My highest value is presence, is being here. Right. The deepest way that I can bring love to anybody is through presence, and is through my attention with that person in this moment, that they're the only thing that exists in this moment. It's to honor another soul, another being, another human to that depth, that every single word that's coming out of their mouth, whether they're speaking about groceries or about the moon or about their to-do list, everything is being felt so deeply and is being heard so precisely. So now that I say that, I guess love is my highest value. Presence is just the vehicle for love to travel.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Chris, where can people find you, please? And I'll make sure I drop all your links in the description below.
So my Instagram is Chris Bale Awakened, and my website is awakenedintent.com, and that's generally where everything will be, like events and the men's group and the women's group and all these other bits and pieces.
So good. And I always ask my guests to deliver a final message to men, to the men watching who may be struggling a bit at the moment and, just wanting some light and hope, I guess. What can you say to those men, Chris?
That emotionally, he's not a second-class citizen, and that he must prioritize how he feels. Just to kind of speak to that statement a bit, I feel it goes very unseen, but even as we're raised as little boys, we're told to always look after the little girls, right? Always behave with and we start to shut things down in ourselves. And I see this day in and day out with men in relationships and partnerships. He's so focused on her experience that he's deeply compromised in his own, because he really doesn't believe that he's worth it. He doesn't believe he's worthy. He doesn't believe that how he feels emotionally is as valid as what she feels emotionally, because right now in society, everything is pointed towards, looking after and taking care of women and the feminine, and rightly so, but we have to take care of everybody. So just for the man to know that whatever he experiences is highly required, that he values that enough to honor it and to put it first.
Oh, what a beautiful message. Wow, thank you, Chris. I've absolutely loved this episode. So much wisdom, and I'm just so grateful for your beautiful grounded presence. So thank you from my heart to yours.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I do a lot of these podcasts, and I have to say that this has been one of my favorite in quite a long time. So thank you for your wide open energy and your engagement. It was great to feel. And I want to apologize about my lighting that makes me look like I've been sunburned or cooked in an oven.
I didn't notice that at all. I was just more in the presence, in the energy. So that's great.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right.
Much love to you.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching, everyone. If you could please like, share, subscribe, get this beautiful message of Chris's out for our men, and of course the women watching that want to get a greater understanding into the masculine and his journey. So thanks everyone for watching, and I'll be back in another couple of days with another episode of Heart Warriors.